righty. Good morning.
Good morning.
We are going to start with just a closer walk with thee. Let me see what key we need. Let's try this one. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toils and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden share? None but thee, dear Lord, none but thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Dear granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. All right, let's pray. God, thank you for being here today, walking close with us, growing close to us. We ask that as we open your word today, that by your Spirit you would draw us close. Help us to see the path that you're taking us. Help us to learn as we go and to trust you more and more each day. We pray in your name. Amen. All right, last time we spent a good deal talking about emotions. That I remember. What I don't remember is which one of these passages that we read that kind of started that conversation. I think maybe it was 3. Some things are opposed to charity. We talked about how charity and love is the same. Carnal. We talked about kind of the human instincts or drives and the part that emotions play. So I think it was 3. So we're going to start in 4. In your books, we're on page 130. We're reading Devotional Classics edited by Richard Foster. And this is a chapter by Richard Roll, and the topic is life in the Holy Spirit. And we've already spent 2 weeks on it. It looks like we're into our 3rd week. We tried to do 2 weeks per chapter, but if we get caught up in a good topic, sometimes we stretch it out a little bit.
So this is kind of a unique, it's more into the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
You use emotions. Is there a difference between feelings and emotion?
I mean, feelings is a simpler, more general word, maybe, because we can talk about, you can have physical feelings. You can feel,
Yes.
different textures and things like that.
Okay.
But yeah, we do, feelings and emotions usually kind of go hand in hand. Feelings maybe is a little bit more, but emotions maybe is a little bit more scientific or.
Well, a guy wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Although
Yeah.
when I told the pastor that, he said, "You mean feelings?" So I didn't know if I used, but that's not what the book was called.
Well, you raise an interesting point, and I think the age that we grew up in and are living in probably has understood emotions or feelings more than we have in the past, at least from a research standpoint. The field of psychology kind of opens up, and along with that comes feelings. I think in some circles, feelings might have there might be a negative connotation to feelings to some degree, that it's a lesser attribute of humans. It's not as profound or not something that the educated or the elite might try to avoid, because feelings don't, at least the thought goes, is that feelings don't help you to really achieve what's possible in the human experience. Now, what psychologists will end up telling you, and this is related to emotional intelligence, that's a field or a concept that's really relatively new, just in the last several decades maybe. The thought behind that is, just like you can have an IQ test, an intellectual quotient, you can test someone for their emotional intelligence. And so there's been testing mechanisms and research that's gone into that. And the thought is, if a person understands the role that emotions play in their own life and in the lives of other people, they're going to be able to be better communicators, and they're going to be able to be better leaders. And so some people understand emotions more than others do, in themselves first and in other people as well. And for someone to have a full and balanced life as a human being, emotions are an important component in that. If you take emotions out of the human experience, you'll have a less desirable experience, or it won't be as full and rich and kind of life-giving. So we need it, but we also recognize that we let emotions play their part, but we don't let them control us or overwhelm us or get the best of us or things like that, So, I mean, it's obviously a topic that's like important to us because we keep coming back to it, you know what I mean? And I think it is very important. As people of faith, people that are interested in church communities and things like that, having a good, healthy, emotional component to the community experience in worship, in fellowship, is so, it's so foundational. If you look at the Bible, it talks so much about love and forgiveness and understanding and joy, and it talks about the Christian experience as being an emotional experience. And so we should open ourselves to that. Now, culture,
Change that.
can you change it? Your emotional experience?
The whole, all of the emotions in a person, you, me, whatever. If we tend to be one way, can we change it? Can we?
To some degree, I think.
Yeah, I guess I'm not explaining this very well.
Well, so emotions start here. The experience starts inside of us, and then we have a recognition of what we're experiencing, and then we have an expression of what we're experiencing. And then it becomes a social component where our expression of our emotions plays into the way that we interact with one another. And so you have different cultural, let's say, different cultures will incorporate the emotional expression in different ways. So, like for example, in some cultures, and culture can be a small group or a larger group, but in some groups, in some social groups, let's say, emotional expression is welcomed. And so people will cry out loud. They will yell in anger out loud. It will be a very expressive, emotionally expressive culture that everybody's engaging in that way, and it's just socially acceptable in that way. Whereas in some other cultures, the emotions are regarded as something that's a private experience that you don't share openly with people around you. You might share with a few close friends, but we don't express it privately. So just one example of this would be the difference in a funeral from one culture to another. In one, it's very quiet and very somber, and it's even rare just maybe a single teardrop or something like that, you see, or somebody quietly cries. Whereas in another culture, you may have people.
Talking about groups.
That's groups.
That's groups. I have heard women talking, all of us do. Oh, she's a downer. Fun.
Right.
Oh, she's bubbly. She's
Right.
got a great personality.
Right.
So it's each person being different.
And that's pointing to the emotions of that person. So.
Well, yeah, it would be emotional.
So there's a difference between a person can be expressive and their emotions and their emotional experience can be very healthy, and a person can be expressive and I would say their emotions can be unhealthy. So when I say healthy or unhealthy, what I mean is if we allow our emotions to lead us, instead of it being kind of an interaction, our emotions can, for example, we can allow sadness to turn into a depression, which can be debilitating. We can allow anger to turn into bitterness, which can be debilitating. So we can have these. It's good for us to experience anger. It's good for us to experience sadness. That's part of the human experience. This is. I mean, look at throughout the Bible. This is written hundreds or thousands of years ago. Human beings are having experiences of happiness, joy, sadness, anger, all of these different feelings, and it's just they are our reactions to what's taking place in our life, So if you say somebody's a downer, that might mean somebody experiences sadness, but what they do with that sadness does not lead them toward a resolution of the sadness. It doesn't lead to healing, but instead it leads to kind of wallowing in self-pity, or it leads to trying to get attention from other people by using sadness as an attention-seeking mechanism.
Is that
That
their personality, or can they change that? That's what I'm asking.
I think they can change that. I think that has to do with the person's personality and temperament. Someone could be more extroverted or introverted, but there are healthy versions of that, and there are unhealthy versions of that. I think the health of our emotions we can control. We can have some influence over. So I could have a tendency, let's say I have a tendency to get mad easily, right? If I spend some time with somebody who understands emotions, and, you know, a therapist or somebody like that, if I spend time with that, I might, in an interaction with them, I might learn what it is that makes my anger so, what gets me angry so quickly. And some of these things might be unresolved issues. So maybe I've been really angry and bitter about a few people in my life, and I've never forgiven them, and I've never moved on from it. I just bury it deep down and don't think about it. And then when somebody cuts me off in traffic, I explode, you know? Or when somebody just, I don't know, uses the wrong tone of voice with me, I explode. So that probably has to do with I have not been processing my emotions in a healthy way, and so I end up expressing them almost out of control, right? So, you know, some people get arrested and they're required by the court to take anger management classes, right? So part of that is a simple thing of learning how to count to 10 when you get angry. Stop, count to 10. That's just like a simple practice to help you gain control of your emotions. So you make a mental note. Anytime I'm going to feel that, instead of bursting out, I'm going to pause and at least give myself 10 seconds. And if I give myself 10 seconds, I realize, okay, I don't have to burst out, right? So that's one example with anger. With sadness, when people say somebody is a downer, a lot of times it's people using this sadness and expressing it to people to get pity, and the pity feels good. And there's a healthy way. If I keep using that to get pity and pity and pity, and then I just keep, and that becomes this habit of mine, then maybe that's not the best way for me to handle my sadness, because in a way, I'm taking advantage of other people. When maybe there's a better way for me to process these things, and it would be almost like the equivalent of counting to 10. Instead of going out and trying to tell a sob story and get somebody to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you poor thing," instead of doing that, pause and wait and see, is there a better way for me to process this so that I'm not always in pain? Because those habits can then make me want to be in pain. And then you can get to know people that they're like pain seekers. They're looking for tragedy. They're looking for problems. They're looking for something to be sad about, because ultimately it leads to them getting attention and getting pity, and that feels good. So that's just not fair to everybody around them, because everybody around them ends up being a tool of some type. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't express our feelings to people that are close to us that we love. We do that, but hopefully in our interaction with those people, they will help us to get to the place where we are healed from our sadness and we move on from it instead of becoming addicted to it, right? So there are healthy ways that we can change. So I don't think we should be downers. You know?
That connects with what
I don't think
we
the
talked
one
about
grieving
before about
is a
Jesus.
downer.
When I said he doesn't laugh, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think everyone has a
someone grieving, I don't consider them being a downer. I mean, I have a cousin, her mom died at 108, and
Aw.
she, 2 years later, she's still grieving because she didn't have a husband or children, so her mom was her only focus. And everyone in the family is attacking her as if she should not be grieving. And that
Right.
upsets me because 30, 40 years into my father's being dead, I still grieve him.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
I don't go telling people every day. I mean,
right,
January is the worst year for that, but
right,
I just feel that everyone should grieve at their own pace.
right.
I know people that bad things happen to them and they laugh,
Mm-hmm.
and other people think badly of them, but
Right.
that's
Yeah,
not
so,
me.
so we are definitely, we definitely have like unique, makeup. We're made differently, and we feel differently, and our experience is different. And some people seem to feel like a little more shallow, and some tend to feel a little deeper, right? And so this is why it's when you're looking at like professions, right? So every profession kind of has an expectation. You're going to have emotional experiences, so you need to be able to deal with that. If somebody it feels very deeply, it just in everything that they do, they're very emotionally sensitive, and they can easily be hurt or angered or whatever. It's probably not recommended for them to go into some kind of a career where the day after day after day they're going to come into contact with these experiences. They may not want to be a social worker, because a social worker is experiencing human tragedy. You know, people that have like dysfunctional relationships, people undergoing loss, people who have been abandoned, all types of things. So a feeling person wouldn't be cut out for that, right? But there are other people that they either they compartmentalize, or they feel, but it's they don't hold on to it, or it doesn't go. So maybe that's better for them to do. So some people might say that the deeply feeling person that has gone through grief and they're still grieving when for them they would have been over it a long time ago, that is unfair for you to put your own experience and say, well, I wouldn't still be grieving. It's unfair for us to put that on somebody else because, like you said, I mean, we're not living that person's life experience, you know? Now, that being said, we also have tools available to us through books, through friendships, through professionals, where we have resources to help us heal maybe more quickly, maybe more thoroughly, and some of us take advantage of those tools and some of us don't. So there are some people that, let's say, are deeply feeling and they have had tragedy and they have not done the work to try to heal for whatever reason. It's too hard, they're not ready, it's unfamiliar, they're afraid, whatever the thing is, and that's unfortunate. And it's just like, it's like physical health today. How many resources do we have at our fingertips to help us to live a healthy, physically healthy lifestyle, right? So the tools are there. The trick today is to not be overwhelmed by information overload, because this person says this is good for you and this person says it's not, and this study says do this and this study says do the opposite. And so that can be hard. But if we do take the time to try to get resources to live a physically healthy life, to learn what to eat and how to exercise and how to process our emotions, we can have a different experience than if we don't put the time and effort into it. Now, we shouldn't judge what we don't know all the details for, you know? And on the other hand, if we're very close to a person, sometimes they need to hear from somebody who loves them, we need to make some changes, you know? Shaming somebody is not a good way to bring positive change usually. Or making somebody feel guilty or embarrassed is not a way to do it. So yeah, sometimes we use the word downer. Sometimes we might say somebody's a downer, and it's not really fair to say that. There's simply a person who has undergone great, grief. My father had to go through losing his wife when he was like 42 years old and had 3 boys, and his wife died. That was not expected. That was not part of the plan. And then he got remarried, and then my stepmom got Alzheimer's and had Alzheimer's for 6 or 7 years, and then she died. And now he's married again. So when I think of my dad's experience, I say, oh my goodness, I can't comprehend what it is to lose somebody that's close to me. So if I feel like judging him that, he should have done this or should have done that, he should have processed things this way or that way, it's like, that means I'm entering into territory that I have no business talking about because I haven't lived through that. Now, if I had lived through that, maybe I can speak to that. But then again, I'm a different person than he is, so maybe I can't speak to that. So yeah, we should be careful and withhold in pronouncing judgment on those kinds of things. But we also want to be helpful when people need a little nudge or a help,
Sadness affects your heart. Personally.
Yes.
Your physical heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I say to her, but I'm not going to tell her not to mourn.
Sure. Some people takes longer, and that's just the thing of it. But we don't want anybody to stay stuck there forever. But I mean, how many people do we know, or how many stories are told about people that after losing somebody, they were never the same again, and they just never recovered from it? I had a friend. We were starting our 9th grade year together, and her brother died tragically in a car accident. Her parents, were never the same. After losing a son that was 17, 18 years old, it was just too much. And so, yeah, they were kind of stuck in sadness. And I get it. Just think of people who have gone through war that has just torn apart. They may not have family left. They may have seen things that were just inhuman. They may have been through things. This is when, no, I'm getting this mixed up. There's a Jewish author who wrote about, what is his name? It's on the tip of my tongue. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote about faith.
Frankl? Like I used to have nothing left but choosing my feelings. Viktor Frankl?
It might be. But the point is, there are people that, can be forever changed by experiences that they've gone through. Yeah, and we don't know what we're made of and what our experience is going to be until we go through it. We may find that we kind of bounce back to normal eventually, or we may find that it's been really, really hard to find a new normal, and we feel like we haven't got it yet. And some of it might be that it's a process, and we will eventually get there to a new normal and kind of back on our feet, so to speak, and experience joy again and things like that. that's possible. It's hard to know, is a person in process or are they stuck?
Well,
Yeah.
imagine, like, my dad was buried on my mother's birthday, so every year, she's.
Does not look forward to her birthday anymore.
Why she does it. She
No.
does it.
This all started because you and I had talked once before about Jesus never laughing. And I'm thinking about, yes, we know he's human, but if you can't laugh,
We don't see anything that's specifically written in the Bible about it. It's hard to imagine him not laughing, though,
You did see it get ticked off when he kicked over those tables.
We know he got mad,
Yeah, and he got.
and we know he got sad. We know he got mad and sad.
And plus he got impatient with people too. He
Yeah.
did that with Peter, for instance, so he kept saying, you love me, you love me.
Right.
It's.
Well, it's hard to imagine somebody being a very deeply loving person and not laughing. That doesn't seem to,
I understand all that, and I
Yeah.
agree. But there's not one word in the Bible that said, we know that too.
yeah.
Well, it doesn't say anything about any emotions in there, but.
Well, they do talk about, was it Elizabeth who laughed? When was told she was having a child, or her husband?
Both Sarah and Elizabeth, I think, laughed. I know Sarah, Abraham's wife, laughed. And that was like, I guess it was almost like she just heard a joke.
Yeah.
It was so ridiculous that she just laughed. Yeah. There's a psalm, I think it's Psalm 2, says God laughs. But he's laughing at people.
Oh, dear.
So he's laughing at the kings and the rulers of this world because they think they're in charge. And he looks at them and is like, that's funny. And God laughs. So that we know God laughs.
On our repressing emotions, we repress them. We're taught at a very young age sometimes, like, especially when we're kids, your parents say, quit crying, grow up. And, you start repressing that at, a young age. Then you get older, like as a man or as a boy, or when you wanting to prove yourself is that if you cry, you're not a crybaby when there, and so you're repressing that emotion. And when it comes out, I just, like myself, I just found out, I have never cried so much in my life since my wife passed. And at first I kept it in, but now I just learned I let it go. I try to let it go in private, and that's what it is, and I do it a lot in private, but I still now got that same thing, I gotta try and repress it, and sometimes it doesn't work.
There's an excellent book called Tear Soup. And it's a story about a woman who is making some tear soup. And the soup is made out of her grief. So she's crying into the soup. And she kind of starts the story by saying, I know that it's time to make some tear soup. So she acknowledges that her sadness. She prepares a time and a place for her to do it in a constructive way. And then she makes a pot of tear soup. And then sometimes the story goes on to talk about how sometimes she drinks some of the soup on her own. Sometimes she invites a friend over and they share a bowl together of tear soup. And it's just a really beautiful story that's written not too long ago. But it's about that process. And sometimes when we're making our soup, when we are crying, I remember experiencing this myself with grief. One of the things that's scary to really open ourselves to crying is that it feels like it's never going to stop. It feels like if I start crying, if I really allow myself to feel what I'm feeling, I'm afraid I'm going to lose control and I'm going to never be able to turn it off again, So I would say just from my own experience, I would encourage people to say, you're not going to cry forever. You're not going to get dehydrated because you cry too much, but it does feel uncomfortable because it's such a vulnerable and it's an experience where we give up control for at least for some moments,
So that's a
and just allow the feelings to have the control. Now, it can be that we need help, and sometimes sitting with somebody that is a trusted friend, someone that understands us, if we have somebody sit with us, sometimes that provides us a sense of safety, and we can feel like, well, if I'm not in control, I know my friend will help me to be safe and to go through it. And but this is the thing. Ultimately, healing comes through us feeling the grief. And that's the last thing that we want to do, because it's not fun. It doesn't feel good. However, after we feel it and allow it to kind of do its work with us, and we've kind of calmed down and we're back to everyday life, there's a sense of like, after we do that, there's a sense of relief, there's a sense of lightness, there's a sense of calm and peace. Crying can be very therapeutic. Now, like you said, we do have a culture that, at least historically, we have told one another, you need to control that.
That's right.
You need to, and essentially what that means is if you think it's coming, turn it off. If you feel the slightest quiver, stop it. Don't allow it to start. And that's the way people think that they can control it. But this is not good to do, because if we bottle it up inside, it will find a way to come out other ways in our life. And it will impact all types of areas of our life that we don't realize if we don't allow ourselves to process the grief. It can turn into other things. So people can turn into very angry people, and focus on taking that grief energy and turn it into anger. And then I'm angry about everything. Some people, we talked about the carnal experience. Some people will turn into like sex addicts, and what they're doing is they're craving some type of an intimacy and a different way to feel the feeling, but they're not processing the deep emotion. So it's like we can end up doing these things where we get adrenaline highs, so we can go jump out of a plane and race our car down the road way over the speed limit, or get into fights or whatever, and we're just trying to feel something because we've turned off the switch. And so we end up trying to substitute the emotions with a different type of feeling. Some people can just go straight to chemicals and just take drugs or start drinking. It's like, I still want to feel something, but not emotions. So the challenge is to allow yourself to go into your emotions and to feel them and to process them in a healthy, productive, healing way, usually in some kind of a community or with people that you trust, because that's the way we're just wired to do things that way. The other ways will get us into trouble, are going to hurt us, they're going to hurt other people. But it takes courage to process feelings. And
Repressing it is, I just think of it, I repress mine. I've looked at it all my life. Very rarely I ever showed emotion, because
Right.
I actually literally crushed my emotions.
right,
I mean, I didn't feel much about anything, you know, and then I had a couple experiences where it started feeling, but I was kind of happy being emotionless about things.
Yeah,
Believe it or not, because I didn't feel happiness really, I mean,
Yeah.
or sadness, it just,
yeah.
it was, and, you know.
Well,
you do
to-
that, and it's like if you repress it,
If you use the analogy of like a dam, you can build a dam and keep the river from flowing,
yeah,
and it just let it build up. You said you haven't stopped crying after your wife has died.
I
So
figured I'm making up for all
this
the
this
years.
this is
That's right.
this is almost like you've allowed yourself to feel, and because it was so overwhelmingly powerful.
Yeah.
So yeah, now you are probably making up for lost
I have.
time.
That's what I figured out,
It's-
and I've done a lot of soul searching on myself, and,
It's very, very common, Jay. We can start crying because we're sad about the loss of one particular person. And as we start to cry, our mind starts to go back to other losses. And then we realize I'm crying about other things too. I'm crying about my dog that died when I was 10 years old. I'm crying about the loss of a friendship. I'm crying about, another close friend from 10 years ago that because of my life circumstances, I wasn't allowed to grieve. So it's our mind and body are these amazing things that will allow ourselves to have a second or a third chance to process through things. And that's been my experience. Because I have found myself being sad and crying and then realizing, oh, I think I'm crying about something else.
yeah.
It's not what I thought it was. Yeah. Or it can be that, let's say your primary grief is over the loss of a spouse that happened recently. You might just be watching TV and a commercial comes on and the commercial makes you a little sad, and as soon as the first tear starts, it's all over. And then suddenly it's like you're crying about the other thing. So it's like your body is kind of telling you, we need to go through this. I'm going to look for every opportunity for you to be healed and whole. And it comes through tears. It genuinely really comes through tears. And Rose, you mentioned somebody being called a downer. Maybe that is just, that person is so unique because they're more courageous than anybody else. They have allowed themselves to be sad. They are committing themselves to the process of grief because that person was so important to them. And so actually they are the special ones that we should look up to, because maybe we need the encouragement. Maybe it looks strange to us because we haven't processed things ourselves. Or there might be people that have managed to get through life and just they didn't have any major losses in life. So for some people, I remember talking to my wife and we talk about the grief process and stuff, and she said, I've gone through a lot of things, but she hasn't had anybody really close to her die. And so she didn't know what that felt like, even though she'd been around for a while,
Her dad, when she said she didn't feel this way when her dad died 40 years ago. But you've got to remember, she's had a lot of years with her mom and taking care of her. I mean, to live to 108 is absolutely, astounding. And then to be with that person for all those years, where, you didn't have the husband or the children, and, once you retire, you don't have to work, because work can keep you busy where you don't have to grieve as much
That's right, keep
as
busy.
when you retired and have
Yeah.
nothing to do.
Yeah, when you have extra time to think about it. Yeah.
Can I respond to Jay? I think most of us grew up in a time in America where feelings were unacceptable. And
It's
my
weakness.
husband, when his mother had cancer, and he pretty much thought anger and joking was all it was about. And it was making him physically ill because he didn't want to admit she was sick. And he started watching soap operas. And he said, oh, women have a whole cornucopia of feelings that I didn't know about. And I think that's just a big part of the growing process there.
Right. Well, thank God that our mothers, our sisters, our grandmothers that were there when we were young and growing up and developing, thank God they were likely feeling people, because we need to be able to develop that part of us. You know, if we were raised by wolves or raised by an unfeeling household, you know, I've met people who were like raised in an orphanage, and so they're raised in this kind of systematic, institutional type of an environment for their entire life. And there was a church member whose mother was raised in an orphanage. And so she said that her mother, who was raised in the orphanage, when she raised her, she really was not that expressive with emotions. Not a very touchy-feely person, didn't talk about feelings. And she said she believes it was because of the environment that her mother grew up in. And she said it had an impact on her when she started interacting with friends who had mothers who were different and things like that. And so she was kind of figuring out the impacts of this as she grew up. So that plays a role for all of us. The question is, what type of environment did we grow up in ourselves? And we don't know, because we don't remember, because we were little and we weren't thinking about that. But we might have some sense of that, and that's probably played a role in the way that we perceive emotions and the way that we process
What
them.
if you were one of 10? Would you?
Oh,
I mean, I think
yeah.
it was like you were in an institution.
absolutely. Is the stereotype is the person who is the only child is so used to having attention and availability to express their emotions and things like that we would say they're an overly emotional person. Whereas, like you said, the person raised with 10 is like, there's no time for that. We're just trying to all not kill each other and to make sure we have food on the table and to get everybody grown up and out of the house. It's like,
So if you were, like, my grandmother was one of 12, okay, so when she had her 7 kids, she didn't have those emotions to bring to them.
right.
You know, so, I mean, it's
Yeah,
not
and
necessarily
it's like you don't have time. You don't have time. It's too busy, so you don't have time to pay attention to it or to process it or to learn it or things like that. So there's got to be. I mean, we're at a place in society where we pay a lot of attention to emotions and probably too much attention to emotion, because we may have a tendency today to. Oh my goodness. So I've gone over to my brother's house before, and he's raising young boys that are like in elementary school now. And they just talk and talk and talk and talk about their feelings all the time. And for me, the way that I was raised and the way that I raised my kids, it was like, yes, we talk about it, but then there's also just like rules you follow, and you get over stuff and you move on and all that kind of thing. And for me, it's too much talking about it. You know, it's like, you know, and this allowance for people to express whatever they're thinking. So it's like, I've heard his kids say and do things to him and his wife that I would never tolerate as a parent myself, because that it would be crossing the line. But for them, they're really committed to their kids having emotional intelligence and be able to express themselves. And in a lot of ways, my brother and his wife, both of them are middle children, so they kind of felt like they were not paid attention to and they were not validated. And so they're like, I'm not going to have my kids go through this, so they pay extra validation. I mean, it's a whole, our generations are a whole pendulum thing where one generation does this and the next one overcompensates and the next one overcompensates, and that's what we tend to do. Well, we didn't make any progress today.
This is something, no, we don't
But
have
it's-
much intelligence about is our feelings.
Yeah, it's true. And it is, I think we should, as Christians, we should be very knowledgeable of feelings and how to experience them and express them so that they are life-giving. To understand that just like other aspects of life, some aspects of life are negative and difficult and challenging. Our emotions are that way too. And so learning how to face the challenges of emotions, learning how to process things in a healthy way, to be able to go through life and move on. You know, the Apostle Paul says things like he runs the race and he's looking forward and he's not looking back. And so there's a part of that we need to be aware of. Jesus talks essentially about attachments and about how our attachment should be to God above all things. And essentially he's saying, if we do that, our life will be better. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. It does not mean that I was thinking about this actually in the last few days. We are encouraged to love everyone. But we're also encouraged to love God so much more than everyone that it pales in comparison. So there's this balance that we're called to, because ultimately, if we need the help that we need to go through life, to live it to the best of what God has created it for, is for us to be attached to God way more than anything else. And then it will help us properly attach to, the people around us and our communities. And I don't think God wants us to be robots and completely unfeeling. I think we're called to compassion and empathy and love. And we're also called to forgiveness. And forgiveness is a tool to help us with our emotions, because without forgiveness, we will stay stuck in anger and revenge and that type of a thing. And that's no way to live. So anyway, let me just tune in here to our comments here and say, just before we leave, we'll say hello. Judy, good to see you here. And you said your brother's here from Indiana. Great. Hope to see Warren in church. That'd be wonderful. We see Maria joining in. Good morning. Ken Osterhout joining in. Good morning. And of course, Bob and Carol, our faithful ones, joining from Mississippi. Good to see you. And then we see Margaret also joining in. And so good to see everybody. Bob mentioned, we talked about the Holocaust, and Bob mentioned it's the 80th anniversary of liberating that. So, and Bob says, Bob McDonald from Mississippi says hello to you, Jay.
Hey, how are you?
And Jay says, how are you back? So good to have everybody here. So another good conversation, worthy conversation about our feelings. Why don't we say this was just a bonus episode? We just didn't cover any of our material today. We just had a bonus lesson here. But again, very, very important things. And probably the reason we're talking about this is because our emotions are so closely tied to our spiritual life. They're very close. When we feel the Spirit of God, we feel the love of God. We'll pick back up here for next time. We'll see if we make some headway. There is another lesson that you can get ahead on, and that is Catherine of Genoa. And the page numbers are in the newsletter, but it's Catherine of Genoa, and her topic is waiting for God, I believe. So it has to do with waiting for God.
That's 180. Elaine, you mentioned page 180, that's the next lesson.
180. That sounds right.
Well, I kind of feel like for me, this talking about feelings is important.
Good. Yeah, I enjoy it. The time flies when we talk about it.
Yes, I can't believe it's an hour.
All right, we'll sing the first verse and the chorus of this as our sending song today. There is a name I love to hear. I love to sing its word. It sounds like music in my ear. The sweetest name